So chapter 5 of the story left us in a pretty good place. The children of Israel have gone out into the wilderness, have received God's instructions. There's been a few hiccups, but at the end of chapter 5, God moves in among his people into the sanctuary. Things, unsurprisingly, don't stay that good though. We start up in chapter 6, and in no time the people are complaining again. We've seen them complain before. Before they cross the Red Sea, they say to Moses, "Was it because there weren't enough graves back in Egypt that you brought us here to die?" They say it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. And here, as they begin to wander, after camping out under Mount Sinai for about a year, it isn't long before they begin to complain again, and this time the cause for their complaining is food. Now let's get some context. God has brought them out of slavery in Egypt, has given them life, has invited them to be his people in the world, and has miraculously provided them food in the desert in the form of manna. I mean, sure, it probably gets old to eat the same thing day after day, but they have miraculous food provided for them in a land that produces no food. But their stomachs start rumbling, and we read on page 72 of the story, the people say, "If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna." They're starting to look back on Egypt with rose-colored glasses. They think the food back there was so good and it didn't cost us anything. But in reality, all they had was table crumbs at best. They were enslaved, and God has promised them a land that's going to fill and exceed their appetites. This is going to be a land flowing with milk and honey, but all they can see is this moment right now, and they are not pleased with how God is taking care of them. You can move forward in the chapter, and the people continue to complain. Here they go and they send spies into the land of promise, and they come back, and most of the spies say, "Yeah, it's really good, but the people there are really big. I don't think we can defeat them," as though God hasn't shown time and time again that he can do whatever he wants with whoever he wants. The people have their doubts, and so they grumble against God, and they grumble against Moses yet again. And this time they say it would have been better for us to die back in Egypt. There seems to be this broken record routine with the Israelites. Things were better in Egypt. They look back on their slavery with longing. This brings up a dramatic moment between Moses and God. Now, this isn't the first time this has happened, but God's frustration reaches a high level. He says to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt?" He goes on to say, "I will strike them down, but I will make you, Moses, into a great nation." And this is an interesting moment. It's a little bit confusing to us because how can God change? How can God say he's going to do that and then he's going to do that? But at the same time, God enters relationships with human beings, so he sort of condescends to our level of understanding, and he needs to express his will in a way that we sort of get it. Whatever the case, I mean, sort of cutting through the mystery here, it sets the stage for Moses to do something really dramatic. Again, this isn't the first time this has happened, but Moses intercedes on behalf of the people. Moses says to God, "Lord, you said you were gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in love. Forgive these people." And God does it. This brings up something that Bible scholars will sometimes talk about, which is that Moses becomes in this moment a type of Christ. Now, we often use the word type to mean a version of something. That's a type of pizza, that's a type of music. But type of Christ more in the sense that the word type is used in archetype or prototype. Moses is a type of Christ in the sense that he previews something of the ministry of Christ. And what is that? That he interposes himself between God and God's people, and God turns away from his wrath. God forgives his people after Moses interposes himself. And so you see how in that way Moses is a type of Christ. Moses models and foreshadows something of the ministry of Christ. One last thing I want to highlight in the story, and then make some observations with the broader story of the Bible, is this moment where the leadership baton is passed from Moses to Joshua. We read this on the bottom of page 83. Moses has been told by God that his time has come to an end. He's not going to go into the promised land. And Moses says, appoint someone to be a leader over these people so that they won't be like sheep without a shepherd. And so it says, the Lord said to Moses, take Joshua son of Nun, a man in whom is the spirit of leadership, and lay your hand on him. So there's this moment where Joshua becomes, in a sense, an heir to Moses. We can point to a sort of a thread through the Bible here. There's three great pairs, let's say, Moses and Joshua. We can zoom forward to a low point in Israel's history, and you see another key pair, Elijah and Elisha. And you can move forward to after Israel has fallen apart and after the sort of intertestamental period. And at that point we find the third major pair, and that's John the Baptist, and Jesus Christ. Now it's interesting to note that Joshua, Elisha, and Jesus' Aramaic name, Yeshua, all have the word Yasha as their root. And that word means to save or to deliver. So their names all mean the same thing. And here we see that Joshua is the one who brings the people into the promised land. We'll find that really in the next chapter of the story. And so maybe here Joshua too is sort of a type of Christ, bringing people into salvation, so to speak. Christian tradition talks about Jesus leading believers into the spiritual promised land. And here Joshua foreshadows that by bringing the children of Israel into the literal promised land. It's also interesting to note that miracles don't happen all the time in the Bible. They're clustered in specific moments, and then a few others are scattered throughout. But there's a strong cluster of miracles around the time of Moses and Joshua. There's a pretty strong cluster of miracles after a relative silence, very few happening, around the time of Elijah and Elisha. And then of course the ministry of Jesus is accompanied by all kinds of miracles. So there's certain threads that tie these three pairs together. It's also interesting that who does Jesus meet on the mountain of transfiguration? In Matthew 17, you also find it in Mark and in Luke. Jesus meets Moses and Elijah, so an individual from both of those earlier pairs, although the first figure in those earlier two pairs. Before Moses goes up the mountain where he's going to die, before the people go into the promised land, he gives this long final address to the people. And part of that, you can read it here on page 87 of the story. He says, "See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, and to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess." Is that what happens? Well, I guess we'll have to keep reading the story and find out.